Hello, and welcome back to my series, 12 Games in 12 Months, where I try to create 12 games in 1 year. March's game is Vertigo-Go-Go. This month's theme was travel, so I wanted to make a game entirely based on movement. As opposed to previous games where I thought of a setting and theme first, I wanted to make a gameplay loop and build a theme around that. I wanted a system that would ensure you could move every single turn, but if you wanted to move further, there was a chance you might not move at all. A classic risk versus reward scenario. So I thought you could have an energy value of say 10, and you could draw as many cards as you like, each of these cards having either a 1, 2 or 3 on them. After you've drawn, you would have to add the numbers together to see if the total is 10 or lower. If you pass, you could move the distance matching the number of cards you drew. Otherwise your turn ends. This on its own has no challenge to it. So you turn it into a competitive racing game, and the loop itself works in isolation. You then have the issue of, if you're so far in front, you have an immediate advantage. So I added an element where your energy decreases the further along the track you go. This really only has a psychological factor, as the person behind will eventually have the exact same handicap you do, but when playtesting, watching someone at the back move 6 spaces while you struggle to move 2 feels like a very real threat. In addition, you could have a spacious board that then has fewer spaces the closer to the end you are. So it's not only about moving forward, but positioning. For the extra competitive step, you could have 1 person per space, allowing you to spend 2 movements to pull 1 person back and then move into their space. So with the loop created, all that's left is to add a theme and some hazards and helpers. These are what give a game flair and make it stand out from the initial loop. The theme was easy after the creation of the loop. Your energy decreases the further you go and it turns into a point. So mountain climbing feels obvious. Adding hazards and helpers to a game isn't a hard process either. Just look at all the individual parts of your loop and make a hazard and a helper for each one. For example, in this loop we have an energy number, card drawing, positioning, and then pulling back. In the final game I made, I ran out of time to add any helpers, as I wanted each character to have a specific advantage, but that requires balancing through playtesting, and my week was very over by that point. So how do you play Vertigo-Go-Go? This is a 2 to 5 player game that takes roughly 30 minutes to play. In the box we have 1 board, 5 character cards with 5 matching tokens, 16 disaster cards with 3 matching tokens, 1 20-sided disaster dice, 69 movement cards, and a mountain climbing handbook. To set up, place the board in the centre. Everyone chooses a character and takes the token matching their card colour. Everyone rolls the dice to determine the first player. Everyone then places their token matching the formation shown in the mountain climbing handbook. Shuffle the disaster deck and the movement deck and place them face down to the side of the board. The first round then begins, starting with the first player and then going clockwise. 1. Say how many spaces you think you can move. 2. Draw that many movement cards. 3. Add the total on the movement cards. 4. If the total is more than the energy value in the space you're in, your turn ends. 5. If it is less than or equal to the energy value, move as many spaces as cards you drew. When moving, you can move into any space adjacent to the space you're in, providing no one else is there. If someone else is there, you must spend 2 movements to swap spaces with them. Once everyone has done this, the next round begins. At the start of each round, excluding the first round, the first player draws a disaster card and places it face up for everyone to see. They will then roll the disaster dice 3 times and place disaster tokens on the spaces matching these numbers. If the same number is rolled more than once, you ignore these rolls and do not place a disaster token. At the end of the round, you clear the disaster tokens from the board and the current disaster card is discarded. Play continues like this until a player reaches the summit. Anyone who still has a turn this round will have the opportunity to pull them back as per the regular movement rules. The player on the summit space at the end of the round is the winner. And that is Vertigo-Go-Go. So let's talk about storytelling. I know it can feel strange to talk about storytelling in the context of tabletop games. I've never been one to read paragraphs of text in the front of some of the rulebooks from the various games I have, but I think too much detail in this regard is missing the point of a tabletop game. A book can tell you a story using paragraphs of text, but in a game, you can feel the story. Some games do this a lot better than others, but if you've watched my last video about my game Lost in the Woods, this is a great example of how the story and the game are so out of sync with one another. I still think the game I made was good, and I enjoy playing it, but the story was about lost lovers, with one last chance to find one another. But because the game only has a runtime of about 10-15 minutes, you're more likely to plough through the game and try it multiple times. It's not exactly one last chance if you're going to try it 4 or 5 times in an hour. To fix this so that the story would have worked, I'd have needed the game to have a much larger runtime and to require a lot more work from the 2 players. So the story could never have worked for the scope of this challenge. So how do you make a good story in a game that a player can experience without the need for any backstory? In my original video, I spoke about when I'm making games, I think of a theme and then fit a gameplay loop into it, whereas in this video, I thought of a loop first and moulded a story around it. Working like this, you can ensure that you're making a story that complements your game. You don't necessarily need to tell a compelling story, but any game that I've loved has pulled me into its world and made me not want to leave. Finding a way to make your game replayable is hard, but solidifying immersion is a really good place to start. Anyway, that about wraps it up for this month. Next month's theme is cat. I already know exactly what I'm going to do. I can't wait. Goodbye and see you next month.